afternoon, everybody, no matter where you are tuning in from Australia today. Welcome to today's National Seniors panelist discussion on Is the Pension Fair? Hello, my name is Luke Cook. I'll be in the background here, but I'll also be asking your questions right at the end. Now, before I kick it off, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, water and community. I pay my respects to them and to their cultures and to the elders, both past, present and emerging. Well, welcome everybody to today. Now, this is a virtual panelist discussion, and that means that we're controlled by the internet. And sometimes when that internet freezes, we want to make sure that you can get the best possible coverage for today. So if your internet is freezing, what I recommend is that you just refresh your page, maybe try a different device or different browser, log out, log back in again, try whatever you can. But the best thing about today's session is that we're actually recording it. So if you do miss it or you do have issues, then we'll send out that appropriate link so you can catch up in it in your own time. Now, we have disabled the chat today, but that's because we've got such a big room in for today's discussion that we've already captured a lot of your questions, and I'll get to those right at the end. So let's get into today's discussion. And what I want to do right now is welcome in each one of our panelists. The first panelist I want to introduce is Noel Whittaker. Noel, can you please switch on your camera and mic and give everyone a warm welcome? Now, Noel is the international best-selling author. He's a finance and investment expert. He's a radio broadcaster, newspaper panelist, public speaker, and he's one of the world's foremost authorities on personal finance. Welcome, Noel.
Thanks. Great to be here again. It's good fun.
Great. Panelist number two we have today is Dr. Deborah Ralston. She has 25 years of board-level experience across education, banking, superannuation, and fintech sectors. In 2019, Deborah was appointed by Treasurer Josh Frysenberg to the three-member panel for the Retirement Income Review. Hello, Deborah. How are you?
Hi, Luke. Very good to be here. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. David Knox. Now, David is a senior partner at Mercer and senior actuary for Australia. He is a national leader for research and policy and the actuary to the Tasmanian and Western Australian public sectors on superannuation plans. Welcome, David. How are you?
Great to be with you all.
And finally, I'd like to welcome in Ian Henschke. Now, Ian is the Chief Advocate for National Seniors Australia since 2017. In 2019, he took on the national additional role of spokesperson for the Alliance for a Fairer Retirement System. Now, Ian, camera back on, Ian. Welcome, Ian, to today. And I'm going to officially hand over the reins to you right now because you're going to lead today's panel discussion. And I'll come back in at the end for the questions from the audience today, okay?
All right, thank you very much, Luke. Look, I'll just tell you briefly about National Seniors for people that are actually not familiar with our organisation. We've been around for almost 50 years and we work with people 50 years and above. And I'd like to thank our panellists today for coming and joining us because we've worked with all of you at some stage over those 50 years, some more recently than most. But look, we've been doing a lot of work around advocacy and research. We do research into what people are thinking about retirement, what people want to do, and of course, if people want to keep working, we do work on that as well. And we have access to policymakers. So it's really important that what you recognise with National Seniors is we are a voice for you at the highest levels of government. Some of the things we've done over the last few years have been the lowering of deeming rates because we said they were set too high. The government listened. Some people say they're still too high. Maybe we'll talk about that today. We've also managed to bring about a widening of the pension loan scheme, which is a great help for pensioners and retirees in general. And we've even put in submissions to electricity pricing inquiries and managed to get regulated price for electricity. But I won't go through all the things we've done, but there are plenty of things that we can still do and bring about change with. So we'd urge you, if you haven't become a member, to think about joining our organisation. Now, I think what we should do straight away, because we've got a lot to get through today, is start with the very basic principle, and that is, what is the purpose of the pension? Now, when you talk to people about this, they often have different views on it. So I think it's really good to kick off today by asking that question. What is the purpose of the pension and what are its strengths and weaknesses? Now, Deborah, you did the Retirement Income Review. You were one of the panellists there, and I'm sure that was one of the things you discussed. So perhaps you'd like to kick us off today.
Thanks, Ian. Well, from my point of view, I think that the age pension is really there to ensure that older people maintain their standard of living in retirement. And for lower income people, that might mean it's the major source of income. For those on middle income, it's probably supplements their other incomes. And for higher income people, they probably are self-funding to an extent, but the age pension will still be important in older years. And that's because it's dynamic. At the point of retirement, around 40% of people get some age pension, and by the age of 80, around 80% of people have some income from the age pension. So it changes over time.
Well, what do you think the weaknesses and strengths are at the moment? Because we're going to be talking about some of the problems, but let's start with some of the strengths.
Well, one of its strengths is it really is targeted well at people who really need it. And it improves equity in retirement for those people who haven't been able to save much. It helps them to have a far more equitable income by the time they get into retirement. And it's been very well indexed over time since the Harmer Review in 2009. It's actually grown faster than wages and prices. So now we see that retirees as a group have less financial stress than younger Australians.
That's interesting to think about. Let's go to you now, Noel. What do you think the purpose of the pension is?
Well, to me, I mean, we've now got over 3 trillion in superannuation, and superannuation was supposed to provide for retirement. So I see it as a safety net. It's certainly not to be the main cause of it, the main source of your income. To me, it's a safety net to help with your superannuation or keep you going if you don't have super.
Well, that's an interesting point, Noel, because we keep hearing about people that don't have super. I mean, perhaps I could throw that to you, David. Is that one of the weaknesses of our pension system? We've got a hybrid system involved with super and the pension, but some people are totally reliant on the pension. I think that's probably what some people would say is a weakness. If you're totally reliant on the pension, you struggle.
Well, inevitably there will be some people, particularly those who are now over the pension age, who have had very little super in their working years. I'm thinking of women who were in the workforce for a limited number of years. We've also got some self-employed people who aren't in the super system. They don't have to be. The local plumber, the local electrician, etc. Gig workers are not necessarily in the super system. So there will be people who, under the current arrangements, aren't in the super system. I think that's a weakness of the super system. But inevitably, there will also be some people who, for whatever reason, need to use their super when they retire for different purposes. It might be a divorce, it might mean marriage breakup, it might mean buying an apartment or a house, so they have no super to live on. And in that situation, the pension is a really useful benefit because it does give them a basic income. It is a safety net, as Noel suggested, or to put it another way, it alleviates poverty. That is a really important part and purpose of the age pension.
So let's just go through that again. We all agree then that the purpose of the pension is as a safety net. So in other words, you are expected during your life to somehow or other have had extra. Now, I'll put that back to you, Deborah Ralston, because when you did the retirement income review, you discovered that there were people that were doing it tough, and you found out why they were doing it tough. Now, what did you discover?
Well, there were, I kind of not sure that I totally agree with it being a safety net. I think that it's a bit more than that. And it ensures a decent standard of living, I would say.
But can I stop you there, because I can almost hear people, because we haven't got the chat line going, but if they were there, they'd say, you try and live on $25,000 a year.
Okay, so let's talk about the weaknesses. And I did say to you that one of the reasons why it does its job very well and it's very sustainable is because it's very targeted to the people who need it. The downside of that is that it's pretty complex. And I know that many people listening today will be thinking the same thing. There's a lot to know about the age pension, and applying for it is not particularly easy. And commend National Seniors on doing this webinar and also on your website. And for anyone who wants to know more about the age pension, I suggest that they have a look at the Money Hub on the Seniors National Seniors website, and that also links you into a group called Retirement Essentials, which can give you a calculator on how much you should get and even help you make an application. So I think that one of the biggest weaknesses is that complexity. And as you said, Ian, there are a couple of groups who really miss out. The first of those is renters. And when we did the review, we found that the Commonwealth rent assistance has not kept pace with the cost of housing. That's a serious concern. And of course, that doesn't just apply to age pensioners. It's anyone on any kind of social security who's eligible for the Commonwealth rent assistance. So it's a slightly bigger issue than just the age pension, but it also means that there's a huge demand for low-cost housing, and that probably means a bit more in the realms of public housing or social housing. The second group who miss out a bit are those who are involuntary retirees who retire before age pension age. And that's quite a significant number of people who might be on New Start for an extended period. And that group is also a concern.
I'll just go to you, Noel, because you get people writing to you all the time. And this is one of the things, I suppose, that you are able to give us an insight. National Seniors, of course, does our social surveys where we talk to up to 5,000 people about what's going on and we get feedback. And I know Mercer does the same thing with David Knox there. But Noel, when you hear these stories of people that are doing it tough, why are they doing it so tough? Is it what Deborah was talking about? If you're renting, you're doing it tough. If you're living on your own, you're doing it tough. What are the reasons?
Yes, but most of the people who write to me aren't so much doing it tough.
Right.
They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And it's very clear that the more advice you can get, the better your affairs ought to be. I mean, there are ways to structure your pension. A lot of people don't know that your furniture and fittings should be $5,000 max. They wrongly put down replacement value. That could cost them, a fair bit of money just getting it wrong. So they certainly need advice. And also it's tricky when it's happening more and more. There's an older partner and a younger partner.
Right.
And then there's tricks like that. I mean, if the younger partner, their superannuation doesn't count until they reach pensionable age unless they start a pension from their superannuation fund. So one of the main things I get, well, is it okay if I start to draw from my super fund to help out? And the answer is yes. But if you're not a pensionable age, then make sure you just make lump sum withdrawals as needed. You don't start a pension. The moment you start the pension, you may well find that your partner has lost their pension. That's very common.
Well, this is a very important point because I think what we're learning here now is that the pension system in Australia is incredibly complex. Now, what I would like to do now is look across what they call the ditch, to our cousins in New Zealand. We fought next to them at Gallipoli. They've been with us in all our wars. We play cricket and sport and all sorts of things with them. They've got a different system. Now, I had a friend who moved over to New Zealand and he did this many years ago and he got very surprised because the day that he turned 65, he got a pension. And his wife was about the same age as him and she got a pension. And he worked for Television New Zealand and he was still able to work and keep his pension. And she had her own business and she kept her pension. Now, if you look at New Zealand and say, well, why did they choose to go that way? David Knox, I know you've looked at these systems around the world. How can we have two countries, one where you've got massively complex system and one where it seems so simple that you just get sent the pension?
Well, you've got, you've got to see it in the balance between the importance of the age pension and the importance of superannuation or retirement savings. We've currently got a super system where employers contribute 10%. It's compulsory. And we've got an age pension. I should say the super is supported by tax concessions from the government. So that is supported. We then got, as Deb was saying, a very targeted age pension. In New Zealand, you've got a universal pension. Everybody gets it. Similar in Netherlands, similar in the UK. But in New Zealand, the superannuation system, as we would call it, is not compulsory. There's an auto enrolment, and the contribution rates are lower, 3% by the member, 3% by the employer, a total of 6%. So it depends on the balance between superannuation and the pension. If you build up your super, then you can, the government can afford to have a means-tested pension. But if you have a universal pension, then there won't be as much money to go and support the super system. So it's a balance between the two. Is there a right answer? That depends. It depends on the history. It depends on the expectations. There's no single answer. But I absolutely agree, and we've heard from Deb and Noel, that the current age pension system is incredibly complicated in Australia, and very few people understand it. And as Noel was suggesting, therefore people do miss out because it's hard to get all the benefits that are available to them.
Before I go to Deborah, I just want to go back to Noel and ask Noel, have you looked at the New Zealand system and thought about that? Because I imagine, the simplicity of it is very appealing, isn't it?
Well, it's a country with no payroll tax, no capital gains tax, and no stamp duty. But, it's paradise, isn't it? But someone's got to pay for that. And we're living in a world now where people are living longer, there's less people in the workforce, so all these things have to be paid for.
Well, I suppose what happened is that it was what it's. You probably know the answer to this, Deborah, but it was back almost 30 years ago, wasn't it, that superannuation came in Australia? So we've sort of moved down that path, haven't we? As David was saying.
Yeah, 1992. So we saw compulsory super come in then, and it was only 3%. It's just gone up gradually over time, and it is quite true that. I think some people are not within the superannuation net, the self-employed, and David was talking about that before. And it's something like at the preservation age, which is around 60, about 20% of people don't have super because they are outside the system. But by the time you get to the age pension age, about 40% of people don't have super because they've spent it in that gap between being able to access it if they're not working and getting to retirement stage. So we're just really seeing now the system is starting to mature, but we don't really get to a mature system for at least another decade yet. What that means is that people retiring won't be getting the full 10% at least, and for some time to come yet. So balances are growing, but they've still got a way to go.
But one of the things that you mentioned earlier on, and we didn't even discuss this in our pre-discussion, but you've mentioned the issue of housing. Now, if you have a 3-bedroom ordinary house in a back street of Brisbane selling for $1.5 million, and someone goes into that and they work and work and work, when they get to access their super, they're probably going to use all that to pay off the albatross of a mortgage they've got. I mean, so we're going to have people living on the pension if they own their own home, and they'll be the lucky ones. So the future doesn't look too bright, does it?
Well, no, not really, because I've got to think. You've got to think about that. And when we save, some people put in money into super, others sometimes put money into housing, and that's a pretty rational choice because your housing savings are not going to be taxed.
Right.
And it makes quite good sense to make sure. I mean, one of the most critical things when you get into retirement is to own your own home. That's for sure. What's happening now is there's a kind of demographic change, whereas once upon a time we would do sort of get married and buy a house at around 27. Now people do it at an older age, around 35 or so. And the cost of housing is higher, so mortgages are bigger. So the end result is that instead of paying off our mortgage in our early 50s, now people are getting to their early 60s to pay it off. And at the moment, somewhere between about 10 and 20% of people haven't paid it all out at retirement. But I think and for many people, they will have 3 or 4 times their wealth stored in the house than they have in super. So a lot of their wealth is in the house. So one of the things that became really obvious to us doing the retirement income review is that the wealth that you store in your house is really important to people. And we should have ways that we can just draw flexibly against that in a safe way to supplement our income in retirement. And you talked about the pensioner loan scheme earlier, Ian. That's a very good way of being able to do that. And there are now private providers as well that are very well regulated that will allow you to draw some of that equity out of your home so you can supplement and continue living in your own community as you get older.
So I can see a future in Australia where you've got people that are very asset rich with their house on a pension, and then in effect being forced, as they say, to eat a bit of your house to keep your standard of living. That could be the future. But Noel, I'd like your thoughts on that, because one of the things that I find very interesting is the government's got a scheme called the Pension Loan Scheme, which is available to everybody of pension age. And I've spoken to 3 people, all of whom had looked at the site, and I referred them to the site, and they said, oh, it's for pensioners, it's not for me, because we're not on a pension. So, Noel, is there some reform that has to be done at the most basic level of just language, how we talk about these services that the Centrelink offers?
Yes, I mean, when you see pension loan scheme, that would say, yes, it's for pensioners, as you say. It's a bit like the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. You've got to be a pensioner wage, but you still get it whether you can get the pension or not.
So a lot of people didn't even know they were eligible for it, did they? For the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, and they were. And it's the same thing with the pension loan scheme. You could be living in a house today, self-funded as a retiree, or even on a very small pension, and say, oh, that's not for me because I'm not on a full pension. I won't have access to that. But let's just tell the people that are watching today that the pension loan scheme is available for you to get, 1.5 times the pension. You can
also, it comes as an income fortnightly.
Right.
And don't forget it's compounding. So, I mean, it's compounding, so you need to watch that. But I think one of the big factors here is you either downsize and move, or you take out a loan. Now, it costs at least $150,000 to downsize. By the time you do up the house you're selling, and then you pay the costs, and then you can lose some pension. Because if you suddenly convert a $1.5 million exempt asset, namely a house, to like $600,000 in the bank and a $900,000 house, then you'll nearly lose all your pension. So there's a lot of things to watch about, to take very great care of if you're downsizing. And also, if you're happy where you are, you mightn't be happy where you move to. It's a big risk to downsize.
This is the other thing. National Seniors, as I said, we're a membership-based organisation, and we're always looking for new members. But what we hear from our members is that they won't downsize because they fear they'll lose the pension. Now, you've got an ageing population with people in houses that have got steps this high at the front that they can fall over and break their leg. I'm talking to you today from Adelaide, but I used to live in Brisbane. And there were steps there that you'd break your neck if you fell down. You know,
I know that.
So you'd be saying, well, why can't you move into a nicely designed home that'll help you? And they say, if I do that, I'll lose the pension. Now, we're saying to the government in the run up to the next election that there should be a home care loan scheme where you can actually borrow the money at a low interest rate to stay in your own home. And if you're downsized and you are eligible for a residential care or a high care package, you should be able to keep the pension. I mean, so you actually encourage people to get into more suitable housing. It seems to me that there's a lot of change that could be done, to get back to our topic, to make the pension fairer. Now, do you agree with that? Deborah Ralston, I'm not sure whether that was in your retirement income review, But it does cross over into aged care, doesn't it? How do we get people to move into suitable housing and look after themselves in their own home if they're too frightened to move out of a dangerous home?
Well, I'm not entirely with you on that.
Okay.
Some people would say if we wanted to make the age pension fairer and people owned a home worth several $1 million, that perhaps they shouldn't be supported on the age pension. So there's that perspective at all. I think it'd be an extremely brave government that put in that.
Yeah, that's from Yes Minister. But let's take Noel's case there before was someone, and through no fault of their own, have just lived in a city where a house has gone to 1.5 and they move into a unit worth 900 and they've got 600 over, they lose the pension. So they're not going to move, are they?
Well, I think people like to, I can't answer that because I don't know. What do you think, David?
Well, I think there's inevitably, as Ian was saying, a disincentive for people to move. Yes. Because you convert the home, the exempt residence, into partly cash and partly a lower value residence. And that cash, whether it's invested or wherever, will affect the pension. It's an asset or it's generating income, so they will normally receive a lower pension. And we do need to explore a way of making that transition from the family home to a smaller residence more attractive.
And David, can I just jump in very quickly there, because that issue we raised before about the universal pension, if you had some sort of universal pension, then you would free up a lot of housing, don't you think?
Well, I think, as you know, Ian, I am an advocate for the universal pension, and has several advantages. One, it's much simpler. Everybody gets it, like New Zealand. Secondly, it provides a foundation of an income. People coming into retirement, they've got their superannuation and they say, well, how much do I have to take out of my super to live? What are the assets? If I have more assets, I get less pension. If I have less assets, I get more pension. It's a jigsaw. It's very hard to put all that together. If there's a base pension that I get, I've got a foundation which I can build on. And of course, if you don't have the means test, then of course you can move from your large family home to a smaller residence. And from that point of view, you generate a behaviour that is different. The other advantage, and it came out in the news today from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, is that if you don't have an income test, then of course you'll encourage people to work a little bit more, part-time work, whatever, if they want to. We're not forcing them to do that. But
all right, I can see Noel there. I can see your hand coming up there. Noel, go for it.
Look, the way to solve the jigsaw is to get advice. There are now products available only recently where only 60% of the asset counts for the asset test, and they provide a lifetime income.
That's
so
right.
You can downsize and take out one of these lifetime income streams and get a very efficient income stream if you know what's available out there.
Absolutely.
Okay,
right.
Go for it, David.
Absolutely right, Noel. What we've got to develop in Australia, though, is a greater attraction, a greater focus on regular income streams. Annuities in Australia haven't been popular at this point for all sorts of reasons. You're absolutely right. There is an incentive in the means tests to encourage lifetime income streams, and I support that, but we still haven't developed in that direction. And if I can go back to the super industry, that's why things like the Retirement Income Covenant, currently before Parliament, is so important, because then the super funds will be encouraging income streams such as the one that Noel has just, annuities or lifetime income streams. But we've got to think of it, it's not the pension in itself, it's the pension plus the super system that generates the income that maintains living standards. At the moment, the two systems don't work well together.
Well, it's a bit like you said before, it's a jigsaw puzzle, but when people look at the jigsaw puzzle, they're always looking on the floor because they think 3 or 4 pieces are missing. You know, they don't.
It's also the assets and income test are way out of kilter. And people don't know that if you're, say, if you're asset tested, you can earn much more income than a person who's income tested. The people don't. I think if you've got 800,000, I think I wrote in today's newspaper, if you've got 700,000 of assets, you can go out and earn an extra 35 grand a year.
Yeah,
because they're way out of kilter.
So
I agree.
This is a good point, because what we're actually uncovering now is that we've got a pension system which appears to be heavily weighted towards the people that are doing well already. But down at the bottom end, you've got people that aren't doing well who could do better. So we've got to rebalance this system. And now one way that David's talking about it is strip it back and start again and just have a universal pension and get rid of all the Centrelink hoo-ha and let's just get on with our lives. It's a very attractive proposition. But if a government's not prepared to do that, how do we rebalance it and what do we tell them they should do? I won't ask you, Deborah, because you already had the retirement income review, but Noel, if you were telling the government today, how would you make it fairer?
Well, as Deb said, the people really doing it tough are a single person who has to rent. They're the people doing it tough. And if you're a couple with 600,000 in super and a pension, you're doing well, I think. So I think we need to maybe have some way to help these people who are single and they rent in some way.
And we're seeing more.
I would agree with Noel there that the single renters are certainly those who need help. I'm not sure the rent allowance is the best solution, because you could increase the rent allowance, but the rents in different parts of the country are very different.
Yes.
Renting in Melbourne or Sydney, that's quite different from Hobart or Broken Hill. The other way that I think we can simplify the system and rectify the balance between assets and income is to sort of say we've already got a deeming rate on financial assets that generate income. If we had a deeming rate on other assets, exclude the home, because that's too political to touch, but on your other assets, so you then just have an income test. You can actually remove the assets test, because all your assets, apart from the home, are assumed to have a deeming rate. Let's not worry about whether that's 2 or 3% or 4%.
Sure.
I'm just going to stop you there now, because I've been working for National Seniors for 5 years and I still have trouble understanding the assets test and the income test. And it's a bit like Einstein's theory of relativity, the E equals MC squared. And it is so complex. And that's why, Noel, you've been a best-selling author and you've got books out there where you can sit down and read it. And it's why we've got our Money Hub website on National Seniors. We've got to sit down and read it. But, just explain, when you did that retirement income review, my understanding was that the government was asking you, could you look at the assets and income test and make it simpler? What did you come up with?
Well, we actually weren't asked to make any recommendations, Ian. What we were asked to do was to really put down the facts around the retirement system, because it is a bit of a contentious area and people have very different views. So one of the things that we did explore at some length is a single test, which, as David and Noel were talking about, you really just incorporate all your assets and all your income into a single test. And for those who are having trouble sleeping at night, you might want to turn out the 650-page report, because there's quite a good chapter on how you might be able to do that, just to make it that much simpler. So we actually looked at the age pension in some detail, and we explored a few ideas, like a single means test instead of having an assets test and an income test. And examined how it impacts on different people. But we really made no recommendation about that. That's up to the policymakers and government to read the facts and see, and to have the public discussion about these things.
Well, that's what we're doing today. And I'll just remind people that this is being brought to you by National Seniors. If you want to become a member, become one, so that we can have a stronger voice. And you mentioned, David, before about this idea of people being allowed to work a bit more. Now, it was the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We've seen Gina Reinhardt come out in the last couple of weeks and say I don't think it's fair. Effectively, what she's saying is that a pensioner pays more tax than I do. I mean, we've got a tax system in Australia where the pensioner who works more than one day loses 50 cents in the dollar, and then that's added to their taxable income. So they could be paying, Noel wrote an article about this recently, but they could be paying 65 or 70 cents in the dollar.
69%, 69, yeah.
69%. 69%. Now, no one's going to go out and work. Now, curiously, in New Zealand, and we'll go back to New Zealand for a moment.
Just stop you there for a minute, though. Wouldn't those people, though, be come under the senior and pensioners tax offset, where they don't count the first $33,000 of your income for a single person?
But your pension is $25,000, so you've already taken up $25,000 of your income there, so you don't have to earn very much before you're off that pensioner tax offset.
Okay, right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
See, people forget that. The pension is not tax-free income.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So this is why it comes back to New Zealand. The New Zealander gets the 25,000, and they say, oh, they need me down at the motel. They need me to drive the bus. They need me to go and work on the farm. They need me to go and pick blueberries or hold the bungee jump or whatever. They go and do it, right? Now, in New Zealand, they have 25% of people over 65 are working today. 1 in every 4 New Zealanders over 65 is working today. In Australia, we have about less than 4% of our pensioners work. 96% don't work. We've nudged them out of work. We have 15% of retirees working, and the 15% of over 65s, working. But the ones that are working are Ida Buttrose, Kerry Stokes, Jerry Harvey. They're not on the pension.
It's interesting, and you make that point, because New Zealand, even in the 55 to 64-year-old age group, has a labour force participation rate of about 80%.
Why?
Whereas Australia is a bit under 70%.
Why?
So it's part of that culture as well, that people are working a little bit longer in New Zealand. Why is part of a social question, but nevertheless, I take your point, absolutely, that if you have a universal pension, there is a stronger incentive to do that part-time work, because you don't have that 50% income rate affecting your pension.
Well, 50% and 50% and higher. And the sad story is, and I want to tell this story very quickly, but Deborah might remember this, last year before the COVID, it must have been the year before last, before the COVID, there was a self-managed super funds conference in the Gold Coast. I got picked up by a man who drove me in a bus, and I looked at him and I thought, you look, reasonably old. He was 75 years of age. He couldn't put any more money into super. He had lost his pension because he was driving the bus from the airport to the Gold Coast. Now, I ask you, is that fair? Today, we've just heard the minister say that he can get his card back. He can get his pensioner card. So when he goes down there, but the thing that shocked me the most was he said, "I hope I don't have a heart attack or stroke driving the bus."
He might get his pension back then.
But look, I think we've explored some very interesting issues today around that we haven't solved the system, but we've got some good suggestions there. Simplifying the system seems to be coming through from all of our experts. We need a simpler system, not a more complex system. So that's the message to government, loud and clear. Look, we've also got questions that are coming in from the audience as well. So I think, Luke, I see you back there, Luke. So what's been back with our audience questions?
Yeah, so in the lead up to today's session, we asked a number of people if you wanted to submit a question today, please do so. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to ask the panelists some of the questions from the audience. And like what you said as well, Ian, if anyone wants to become a National Seniors member, you just click on the offers area down the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, and you can go through the appropriate links there. The first question, I'm going to direct it to you, Noel, is around pension indexation.
Yep.
There's a lot of confusion about pension indexation and that it isn't fair. Can you briefly explain for us how pension indexation works and whether you think the current process of indexation is fair? And I know some of this has been spoken about before, but it's part of the question today.
Look, if we didn't index the pension, it wouldn't keep pace with living. So we need to. It's in the pension itself is indexed twice a year in March and September, I think it is. That's the pension itself. But then the thresholds are indexed on the 30th of June every year. So you've got 3 lots of indexation. And as Deb made the point, because it turns out it's indexed to wages, it's actually growing faster than real wages. So I think it's very hard to find any fault with the indexation system.
Thank you. David, I'm going to direct this one to you. Universal pension, I know you mentioned it before as well, but there was a lot of comments and questions about this from many audience members around universal pension. Some of our audience members are concerned the wealthy should not get government financial support, and others want to know more about the kinds of changes to the tax system that might be required to pay for the universal pension. Is there anything else that you want to expand on this?
Yeah, thanks, Luke, for that question. I think one has to recognise, as I said earlier, that government support for retirement income comes in 2 major ways. One is the direct payments to the age pension, and the other is taxation concessions for the superannuation. Now, it's well known that the taxation concessions are skewed towards higher income earners. The age pension, on the other hand, is skewed towards lower income earners. Now, is that right? That's a different question. But if we were to give everybody the age pension, which would be taxable, so the wealthy would pay tax on it, but we could afford to do that by actually lowering the taxation concessions in the super space, which are primarily, or much of it, is received by high income earners. So by adjusting the tax on super, then there's a mechanism to actually get a little bit of money back from that point of view, but reverse it and give it back through the age pension. I think that mechanism would be a lot simpler than the current complexity we have spoken about. Now, of course, it's then a debate as to how you would adjust the tax on super. But of course, that's another question. One mechanism could be, excuse me, for instance, the compulsory level of superannuation is legislated to go from 10 to 12% as we build up super. Now, if everybody was to get the age pension, we might say, well, maybe 10% is enough, and not go to 12%. And that would save some of the concessions. We could also look, and this may not be popular, but we could look at the tax exemption of income that retirees receive. There are people in the SMSF sector and other sectors who've got more than $5 million in their super account, who are pensioners and paying no tax on their investment income. Up to 1.7 million and then 15% tax. But, is that appropriate? So I think at the top end, there's a little bit of adjustment that could be carried out as well.
But how could a person with 5 million in super get the age pension? You couldn't do it.
No, well, that's true, Noel. But if we were to have a universal pension without the means test, they would be getting an age pension. And that's what I'm trying to balance.
Next question I'm going to direct to you, Deborah, about the taper rate. One question we had was about the recent changes to the assets test taper rate. Was it a good idea to bring in a harsher taper rate, for example? Does this encourage people to spend down their assets to get under the pension threshold? And do you think there is a better way for setting the assets test?
Yes, thanks, Luke. Actually, a lot of people have asked that question, and I think when you look at the taper rate, there are a number of different ways you can do it. When we did the review, we had heard a lot of anecdotal evidence that people were spending down to get under the taper rate, the threshold for the age pension. So we looked at the data very carefully, but in fact, it didn't come through that way. And what we have done is to what the government did was to tighten it up at the top end to some extent. So now, if you're a householding couple the assets test is around 788,000. We actually couldn't find any evidence that people were spending down their money to get under the cap. One of the things that is a really attractive option, though. We want to encourage people to have an income that's fairly steady and reliable, and to stop people worrying about running out of money. One of the things that is very attractive for people to reduce their assets level is to go into a product that Noel talked about before, a longevity product with a component of annuity into it, and that gives you very favourable treatment under the assets test. So not only are you getting certainty of income, but it also means that you get a bit more in your age pension when you're around that end section. But I think what you've got to keep remembering about the age pension is that it has to be sustainable, because it's our kids and our grandkids coming through who are paying the cost of the age pension. So it's an intergenerational bargain, and we have to make sure that that burden is not unreasonable for younger generations.
Yep. Yes, Ian?
I just wanted to come in on that one, Deborah, because I do think that it's very important that we recognise the wonderful work of the Actuary of the Year, Michael Rice, back in 2018, who did do a projection out to 2050. And he actually said that because of the things that David talked about, the generous, superannuation and the build-up of superannuation, that in fact, despite what Peter Costello thought when he held the first intergenerational review, that we would have a high percentage of GDP going to the pension. It was going to be, under his thing, something almost up to 5%. It's going to be less than 3%. So in fact, the nation can support the pensioners through to 2050. The big issue that came up this week was whether we can support aged care. That's which is another one. But I think in terms of the pension system, we've got, and I'll take advice on this, but I think we've got a pretty good sustainable system, haven't we?
Look, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at the OECD nations that we like to compare ourselves with, whether it's in Europe, North America, or elsewhere, by 2050, we are heading to have the lowest pension cost of any OECD country.
Well, could we just wrap this this little bit of discussion here about this? Because I often hear people say, "Oh, I'm putting all my money into under the bed or whatever because I'm really worried that the pension won't be there." Can we get a guarantee from a government that the pension will be there in 2055 or 2065 or 2199 or whatever? Can we get a guarantee from the government so that people can feel a bit more comfortable? Noel, to you, do you think there should be that guarantee? A gilt-edged guarantee like the way they back the banks? They'll say we back the pension.
Well, I think they're always going to say that there will be a safety net. But, given our trillions of dollars of debt and our ageing population plus the aged care costs, I don't think you can guarantee it'll be at its present levels.
Right. David?
Look, I think it's affordable at the current level because of the burgeoning super industry. And as long as we convert super into income in retirement, so living standards are maintained, I think it's affordable. But Noel is correct. We've got to tackle aged care. We know that aged care is underfunded, and we've got to find a way of providing good aged care, whether that's in aged care homes or people living in their own home, residential care and the like. But that's still waiting to be tackled. But in terms of the pension itself, it is affordable. And I absolutely agree. We want both major sides of politics to say the pension will always be there. It's not going to disappear. It might be tweaked. We've had a means-tested pension virtually since 1909. We're going to have it for decades to come.
Okay, so this is a good point, though, to let people who are watching this know that government will always provide a pension. And so they've got to know that it's not going to disappear. That would have been a message that I think you would have had in the retirement income review, the surety of it.
Yes, absolutely. We have said it is sustainable and it's providing a very good service to those who need it. And what we haven't talked about today, there's also the fourth pillar of what I would call the fourth pillar of the retirement system, and then we have a really solid healthcare system. We have tax concessions. We have aged care assistance. Notwithstanding that we know that we've got to do some things about sustainability. So when we go into retirement, it's kind of invisible, that fourth pillar, but it's probably worth around the equivalent of the full age pension to everyone over 65. Those package of services are just so important in retirement. And again, we need to fully understand them well too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is something that perhaps we should do. I mean, this has been our first webinar here at National Seniors, and I really appreciate everything you've done today, providing information. I think we should do another one, perhaps on aged care and how aged care fits in with it, because National Seniors did a big survey. Professor John McCallum, who heads our research section, did a big survey recently, and they asked people, have you planned for aged care? Most people haven't done any planning for it at all. And it's a bit like the pension. A lot of people, they just arrive at a certain age and say, oh, I better go and do the paperwork, or I better go and find out about it.
And you know, one of the problems with that is because people don't really understand it, but they're worried about it in the back of their minds, they tend not to spend their money in retirement because they think they're going to need a huge amount for aged care.
Right.
In fact, our system is such that only about less than 2% of people ever hit the quite modest cap of personal contributions. So it's not necessarily anywhere as expensive as people think, but we need to understand it better and prepare, as you say.
Absolutely agree with that.
Sorry, Noel was nodding away in furious agreement there, Noel. Do you
hear what
that?
Deb said? Absolutely, because people are terrified to spend because they're frightened that the aged care will cost so much money.
Yep.
Yes.
And we were talking about the government and the major parties, you know, saying the age pension will be there in the future. We also need a much simpler explanation of what the government provides in the aged care space. It's different means tests to the pension. It's more complicated, and most of us don't deal with it until we have to. And I think we really need to recognise that the government actually stands behind aged care and puts a lot of dollars into it. May need to put more into it, as I was saying, but it's not simply expressed at all, and most people haven't got a clue.
But also, I think we must say it is 10 times more complex than superannuation or the age pension.
Really?
Aged care is terrifyingly complicated.
Right.
I'd love to see it the same means test for the age pension and aged care so people understand what's happening.
Yeah.
That would be one small element of simplification, but it could be done.
So Noel, apart from reading your books and reading your columns, where do people go and get information? And Deb's already mentioned we've got information up there on the National Seniors website, because people want trusted information, don't they? I mean, I understand, Noel, that people can actually go to Centrelink and there's a financial information service there. Have you heard any feedback about that?
Yes, they're very good. I think the hardest thing is making an appointment because they're very busy. But as Deb said, you've got the two people I mentioned are Retirement Essentials and My Pension Manager. Both do it for a very reasonable fee, and they're both in my book. People do need advice because if you get advice, you can have a much better outcome. That's the bottom line.
And can I go to you there, Deb, on that, on how people can get trusted advice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one of the biggest conclusions, is that people are so frightened of costs they don't understand that we'd really encourage them to go and get some advice. And you can get, Noel has mentioned a couple of places where you can go and get low-cost online advice on particular things. But it is an area where we really need to see some reform of the financial advice industry to make it more affordable and more accessible. And as David mentioned, ideally with the retirement income covenant coming in, people will get that kind of guidance and information as they progress towards retirement from their super fund. But there's a long way to go on the advice area just yet.
Well, as I said, National Seniors has got a money hub where you can go and find information. I mean, I also think that it might be useful to have the equivalent of what you'd call a GP, and maybe people should get one free trip to a trusted advisor or something. You know, when they reach a certain age, 65 and 75, when they plan for retirement, when they plan for aged care.
There was an announcement this week, I think, from ASIC, that they had approved more simple advice in certain cases. But
good.
You know,
Yes.
It was fairly modest, the change, and of course next year there is a Treasury review on the quality of advice, and another review. And we're absolutely right that it's middle Australia, not low income earners who get the full pension. It's not high income earners and high net worth people that can afford advice. It's middle Australia who are struggling to know where to go. I just wanted a little bit of advice to help me here or there. Where do they get it at an affordable price? And it's very hard to find.
All right. Well, look, that's a good point. That's a good point I think to end on, because we've been giving people advice or some help and information today. We've mentioned the fact that if you join National Seniors, you can find out more about this. We're going to have another webinar. And look, it brings us to an end of our first webinar. And I do want to thank you, Noel. Thank you very much for your time today. Deborah, thank you as well. And David, I know there'll be a standing applause for you when you leave the building, because there's a lot of people who love your universal pension ideas. So, but look, let's just remember that we're going to continue to fight for a fairer and a simpler retirement income system. We're all agreed on that. That's the message we're going to take to government in the run up to the election. If people watching this want to support that, then become a member. We're going to send you out some polls as well. All the people that have been watching are going to be able to have their say on the universal pension. Independent Pension Tribunal. Maybe we need an independent tribunal to set the rate of the pension and deal with those things like rents in different states, those sort of issues. We also want your opinion on working without penalty on the pension, which is the big topic of the day as well. And then, of course, the other poll we're going to do is, how can we support people to stay in their own home and out of residential care? Should we have better systems around that? Because we hear from everyone at National Seniors, they say, I want to stay in my own home, I don't want to go into one. And it's good that Deb reminded us that most people don't end up going to an aged care home. They do actually stay in their own home. So that's another fear we should dispel that's out there. So keep your eye out for those surveys in our inbox. I want you all to be part of the survey as well. So I want to see you take part as well. You'll give a commitment. You'll be in our survey team, will you? Because thank you very much. But look, the single most important thing you can do is talk to other people about our work. And I do want to thank everyone about this. If you're not a member already, you'll get a special introductory offer to join National Seniors. We look forward to doing this again. I look forward to seeing you all in the flesh at some stage, because it feels like we've spent 2 years talking on the telephone or on the web. We're going to end up in a better place in 2022, and thank you for helping us get there as well. So once again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.